Your car guy here. Today we're going to be replacing the radiator on a 2008 BMW e60 5 Series. So this is the 2008 and newer BMWs. First things first, we're going to need to lift the vehicle. This will give us access to the lower hoses and to drain the radiator. We want to make sure that we lift it properly. If you look down on the side of the car, there's a little arrow on the skirting here that shows where you see that arrow right there? It shows where the jack pad is. I'm going to show you the jack pad here. All right. So if you can see, this is the jacking point. Now they make some adapters that you can get for your floor jack that'll actually go right into that jack point, but it's a good safe point to jack your vehicle from. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to jack the vehicle, place it on jack stands in order to give us full access. Now that we have the vehicle up and secured on jack stands, it'll make it easy to get a tray underneath to capture the coolant that we're going to drain. Now in this car, the underbody tray under the engine is missing, but in most cases, if it's there, you'll need to remove the underbody tray. I'm going to show you how to get to access to the top of the radiator here. The radiator support panel here is held in with 10 T30 screws around the perimeter. Once you have the screws out, you'll see it sits underneath this little safety catch. You've got to slide it back a little bit, then you can get it out of the way. And you can just take and fold this up and set it on the engine and leave the hood releases attached to the cables. You don't have to mess with them. Next, you're going to have the top of the radiator shroud that's going to need to be removed. The coolant return line just pops out of the top of the shroud like this. That'll give you access there. Then there's going to be 5 T27 screws. One here, one here, one here, one here, and one right here in the center. This one actually helps hold the fan to the radiator. Then that piece can be taken off and set out of the way. Now you have access to see the top of your radiator and your AC condenser here. It's important when you do this job to clean out any debris that you find down in that area in between here. That debris can help stop up the radiator, cause it not to perform as well. You'll lose cooling capacity. In some cases, it could even cause a catastrophic overheat situation. All right, now we're going to have a couple of electrical connections that we're going to need to disconnect. One of them is the actual electric fan connection, and you're just going to squeeze the 2 tabs on the outside. See there, and there's one on the other side. You'll squeeze those, pull up, disconnect the electrical connection there. Further down, we have the electrical connection for the radiator outlet temp sensor. You can see it right down there in the center. What we're going to do with it, because it has just a little spring clip, you push that spring clip in, and then you can just pull that sensor connection right up out, and you're free there. Now we'll want to make sure we drain the radiator. So the drain is up on the passenger side, right here above this coolant line connection. There is a aluminum housing. You'll see that there's the actual drain here, and then this red knob that you're just going to screw out by turning it counterclockwise in order to allow the coolant to drain out of this fitting. Now, if you don't want to make a mess, what you can do is put a rubber hose on that fitting to bring it and extend it down out of the way so it's not just splattering all over this underside here and go directly into your drain pan. Now, when you're draining the coolant, it helps to take off the cap off the coolant reservoir. This will allow any pressure that's holding coolant in from creating a vacuum. I say pressure, but the vacuum. And thus it'll allow it to drain properly through our drain hose extension that we put on to make for a nice clean drain. Now we're going to have multiple hoses to remove on here, one of them being the return back to the coolant tank. Now if you'll notice here we have a crimped on connection. These are really simple to open up. You're just going to take a screwdriver, put them inside there, and spread that open so that you can release the hooks, and then it'll slide right off once you get some of the pressure off of it. You get it popped open, and then we can take and work it right off. Now when we go back to replace this, this is not a reusable clamp. We'll throw that away. We'll go with a new clamp. Now your main upper radiator hoses, you'll notice BMW uses these really cool quick connects. They're nice. They have an O-ring inside. So we're not taking it apart. This is not a clamp that can be removed back here. This is a permanent fixture. What we have to do is take off this ring right here, or clip, and it's just a matter of prying it out. You lift it up. Once you lift it up, and I'm going to get you a good view of it. See how it's pulled up out of there? Now what that's done is it's no longer over the fittings, and it'll allow you to then just work that hose right out. You'll see that clip fits right into this groove in the aluminum radiator. So that's your upper radiator hose. We're also going to have to remove the transmission cooler from the radiator down here, and we've got a couple of hoses on the driver's side, including the lower radiator hose. We'll wait till we're fully drained before we remove those. All right, this bottom hose on the passenger side, we'll notice is below our drain plug as far as how far down it sits. We're gonna do the same thing. It still has a quick connect fitting. So once we get the tab pulled out like so, we're going to be able to take and just kind of wiggle it back and forth and remove that hose. Expect to have some more coolant drain even though you've already drained the radiator, because this is truly at the bottom. Okay, on the driver's side, we have the transmission cooler, which is mounted to the radiator. You'll notice we have this plastic kind of handle that this is actually what's going to release that clip that holds the entire assembly up to the radiator. So it's going to pull that metal clip down, and then we'll be able to take and slide off. So we pull it down to release it, then we can take and slide out the transmission cooler, and it may take a little bit of wiggling, but it's going to come out with just a little bit of finagling. If need to, you can very gently put something in here to help pry it away. If you try to pry right at the base where that's connected to the radiator, you'll get the best results. So we'll take our handy dandy screwdriver, if you can see in there, you can just take and put it right under that base, twist it a little bit, and it'll pull that out. So here you can see there's the port on the radiator that this came out of. We've got it out now and it's moving free. Now that the hoses are disconnected, we can lift the radiator and the fan assembly as a unit on up out of the vehicle. It'll just slide right up out. Now with the radiator and the fan assembly removed, you can see just how much leaf debris and trash was blocking the entire bottom half of that radiator. There's also a sign, it's wet over here, of the leak. We were seeing some coolant coming out of the radiator, that's why we were replacing it, but we have a dramatic issue here, not just the sludge inside the radiator, but with airflow across it. So basically, that radiator was operating at about 50% capacity max. That's assuming that the coils inside are clean and clear and allowing coolant flow. You'll note that while we're doing this, we're going to want to clean. So you see all this leaf debris and stuff that fell out. That's all tucked in between that condenser and that radiator. So we're going to want to get all that real clean, make sure we clean anything that's in front of or behind the condenser and the oil cooler to make sure that we have a really clean installation. With the radiator turned around with the fan assembly removed, you can see the absolute signs of a leak right here in the radiator. Another one on this side. Definitely time to replace this radiator. Now because of all this debris that's blocking up everything, we're going to go ahead and take a shop vac and clean all this out before we go any further. We'll probably also do some flushing of the cooling system. Just run a hose into the radiator hoses here. We're going to flush out any trash because of the debris that we found inside the radiator as well. Make sure that we get the cooling system as clean as possible. Okay, so here we are. Our radiator's back in, our fan shroud's in. We just got to make sure we reconnect our electrical, snap all your hoses in. Now remember, we had to cut this clamp because it was a permanent style clamp. What we're going to do is we'll push that on. That's a nice barb fitting. And we'll use a zip tie as a clamp here, which should work really well. Now's a good time before you put your cover back on to go ahead and fill your coolant and observe for leaks. That way, if you've got a leak where you're gonna have to pull some things back apart, you want to make sure that you have access without having to take a bunch of extra parts back off. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to go ahead and fill the coolant. Okay, now that we've filled our coolant, we haven't observed any leaks, so everything looks pretty good. We're going to go ahead and reinstall the top cover of our fan shroud, or our radiator shroud. This is important to make sure you put this piece back in. Don't forget it, because what this does is it helps direct air through the radiator, so your cooling system effectively is able to pull air across and achieve the cooling that you're desiring. So you don't want to leave this out. It is an important part of the system, and you will not get the cooling performance. Make sure to take your coolant return line, and this actually is what helps the system bleed out the air. Make sure it snaps back in place across there. Then we're going to reinstall the 4 bolts that hold it in place. One here, 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 and here, and then the one that pins the fan to the shroud. And when you're installing the radiator support, just make sure you get it down so it slides underneath into position. We'll line up all our bolt holes and we'll screw it down. One thing to watch when you install the radiator support, make sure that this cable for the passenger side hood latch is not pinched under the support or under this bolt. That way you don't have any issues with that later. Okay, now after we've finished, we've monitored for leaks, we've let the vehicle run up to temperature and cycle a few times. Now I'm monitoring the temperature in a sub menu on the dash, since these cars did not come with a temperature gauge. But there is a way to get that temperature to display. If you need information about that, I can direct you. There's other videos on YouTube that show how to display this temperature, engine temperature. We see that it's holding nice and steady at thermostatic temperature. We're good with that. Don't be surprised if you have to add a little bit of coolant over the next day or two after you've done a radiator job. The system can have an air pocket that may work its way out. So it's just a matter of keeping an eye on it and monitor it, but it's not that much of a big deal. You also want to monitor for leaks. Just pay attention if you see any coolant underneath the vehicle after you've done this job. Now, this job, I was able to do the radiator, including coolant, for less than $200. And I did use a Behr, B-E-H-R, radiator. Behr is the factory manufacturer for BMW. Now, the replacement radiator was not an exact radiator, as it did not have the drain plug fitting built into it. But for the price, I really didn't need it. I can always disconnect that lower hose that comes to the radiator and drain it from that. So less than $200, I think this is a great repair, and we've got a radiator in our BMW. This is your car guide. Don't forget to like and share our videos and help us grow the channel. Subscribe. See what kind of fun things we're going to do next.